people, individuals, as well as entire countries and companies larger than most nation states, run artificial intelligence-driven algorithms that access and assess billions of data points per second in order to overwhelm and outmaneuver human nature. And they do it using devices designed for 4-year-olds. And our response has largely been to hand those devices to our kids and say, make good choices. Like, dude, you are setting your kid up for a fall. I have set my kids up for a fall when I've done stuff like that. Let me tell you, one of the biggest myths that we have as a church, and really as a society as a whole, it just looks different in the church, is the good kid myth, right? The idea that there are these good kids out there who, like I don't have to worry about them because they're a good kid. So let me ask you a really quick theological question. What kids do you think Satan's going after? Like if there's a bad kid, you think he's like, oh man, I got to put all my attention there. No. When you talk about a good kid, you're talking about the kids that Satan wants. You're talking about the kids that are in the line of fire in this battle, right? So the idea that I could look at my son and, man, I love him to death. He's a better kid than I was at his age. Like I so pray he is Sam Jeffrey 2.0, that he's just, all the upgrades, and he leaves all the negative behind. And there's so much of that that's going on. I'll give you just one bragging point. Right? This has nothing to do with why I'm here. This is just solely me telling you my kids are better than yours. He was diagnosed with COVID. And my wife, who's a nurse, swabbed him, and we both had COVID earlier in the week. And so he had to stay home from school. And it's me and him staying home from school. And he said, and as my wife is leaving, she says, look, you need to rest, relax, make sure you're hydrating a lot, getting good stuff to eat, and don't sit around all day. Like, do something, like go for a walk or something, and just to kind of, clear out your lungs a little bit. And I heard go for a walk, and he heard or something. And so he challenged himself on Monday, the day after he was diagnosed with COVID, to do 1,000 push-ups in a day. He said he laid out a list, and he said, I'm doing 40 sets of 25, and then he did it. He did it, and he did 25 extra just to make sure in case he had miscounted, right? That's some good old-fashioned Church of Christ legalism there. 25 just in case I miscounted. But he's just such a good kid. He's a leader in his school. He leads devos at school and at church. He's a leader in the youth group. He's trustworthy. I trust him more than I trust most adults. The vast majority of adults that walk on this planet, I trust my son more than them, right? I would be insane to think that's not exactly who Satan's targeting. That's exactly who Satan's targeting. So the idea that I'd be like, oh, Caleb, you're a good kid. Go make good decisions, buddy. No, that's not how any of this is supposed to work, right? We live in a society where our children are being hunted, and we can get frustrated with them because they don't realize that they're being hunted, and at the same time, you're being hunted and you don't recognize it, right? And so, like, it's this, this perpetual cycle, and we've got to figure out a way to break out of it, right? There are no good kids. There is nobody and there's no good adults. There's, like, when you were talking about algorithms that are learning exponentially faster than the human brain can on how to get people to make decisions, and you're stacking that up against a 13-year-old? It's just not a fair fight, and it's about time we recognize it. Now, in this session, I want to talk to you about predators, threats online, but I don't want to be up here just sounding like, the boogeyman's in the closet and, there's a sexual predator, behind every click. That's not the way the internet works. I mean, I think it's fair to say that if I bring my child into a room that has 100 people in it, and or if let's just say there's a room that has 100 people in it, and 10 of them want to bless my child, 10 of them want to harm my child, and 80 of them don't care either way. That's roughly equivalent to the internet. That's the vast majority of the internet doesn't care about you. You don't exist in their mind. You're to the extent they even are aware of your existence, you're a number, you're a cog. But there are definitely people out there looking to harm. There's definitely people out there looking to bless, right? But if I got a kid, I'm not going to just push them into the room and be like, good luck. I would be a horrible parent if I did that. If I know there's 10 people in a room that are hunting my kid, no. If they've got to go in the room, and I think that's a solid question of if they've got to go in. I don't think it's assumed that they got to jump on the internet or into the smartphone world, which those terms really are just synonyms now. I don't think it's a given that they've got to get a phone. But if they do, the only way to do that is to tell your child, hold on to my hand, and you got to do what I'm telling you to do. Because we're going to go in here, and it may be fine, but if it gets dicey, I need you to trust me, and I'm going to handle the situation, right? I use the example when I was with CIA, we did protective details, and our policy was if you were working with a VIP, if you're protecting someone, and it all breaks bad, terrorist hit, whatever, you were supposed to look at that VIP, whoever in our case, it was the body man, is the guy who's right on them. They were to look at the VIP and say, link to me. And everybody in been briefed that meant you grab the back of the belt, right? Like you run your hand through the belt of that person. And then, because you've got the gun, and they're going to get right behind you, and inevitably, as you're exiting the building, you are constantly putting your body between them and the threat. That's the only way you should be taking a kid onto the internet, right? I'll go with you, right? If we got to go, we're going together. Link to me, because I'm a deeply flawed 46-year-old, but I've also been around the block a little bit, and so I'm going to be able to spot threats better than my 12-year-old, right? That's just the way it is. If that's not the case, then we got some pretty big problems, right? But that is how we have to do it, because we've got to get to a spot where we recognize the threats are always out there. And if we're going to operate in this room with 100 people in it, if that's where we're going to live our lives, then let's live our lives there. But we've got to recognize the threats that are out there. And it helps for me to be able to point out the good guys. Like that's, for instance, it's a random thing to throw out, but like when we're talking about movies, I've pointed my kids to Plugged In movie reviews, right? You go pluggedin.com and it gives you Christian movie reviews, right? And tells you, kind of breaks down what's in everything from is it something I want to give my time to? I've pointed my kids to that, right? I've pointed my kids to biblical resources. I've pointed my kids to Christian leaders in politics and in community, and said these are people that I trust. Now you've got to develop your own opinion and understanding. Like don't just do it because I said to do it. Learn it, understand it, make your own decisions. But I've helped point that out, and I've helped point out bad. When they'll come in and be talking about whatever they're into. My boys are the only ones at home right now, so that's what's fresh on my mind. But it's so odd because my experience with my boys on the internet is they get lured down dark paths, right? Whereas with my girls, they were just shamed, right? Like it was a different threat for girls. Girls are made to feel inadequate. Girls are made to feel they don't live up to the standards in whatever way. Whereas boys are kind of led down this path of like, oh, this is what it really means to be a man. So it's a little bit different, or it's actually dramatically different. And so you've got to be aware, you got to be ready, you got to be engaged. But so I don't want to be sitting here talking about all the different, acting like there's a sexual predator around every corner, although there's plenty of them out there. I want to talk to you about the losses that we're suffering, right now in this environment. And the first one, the biggest one, if we look at the percentage of people that get hit by this is easily the biggest threat in the smartphone society. And that is opportunity cost, right? The amount of time you're spending that you could be doing something worthwhile, and I mean, like, I feel every child, and every young adult's eyes roll as I say this, but you could be reading a book, like it's, they're so, I love, and I'm trying to get my boys into it, and my older son, he's starting to get into it, but, we talk about walking the halls of the dead, the people who have gone through before us in this life and learned to go, the experience is a great teacher, but the easiest kind of experience to get is other people's experience, right? To read what they learned. And so that's out there, to spend time getting better at a craft, right? To spend time in physical fitness even, right? I mean, there's just so many good opportunities to make yourself better in any number of areas, right? With a definable skill set, right? But that's what gets most people, is just sitting there, working your thumb muscle, right? Scrolling. And I've fallen victim to it too. And so that easily the biggest thing is we have so much potential as a society and as individuals, and we're just not going to meet it because we have dumbed down our society. We'd rather take small dopamine hits than to actually accomplish something and get the full rush. Right? Because it takes hard work to be a champion, right? But the reward is huge. I mean, it's awesome, right? But we would settle for just enough, right? Just enough to kind of sate the desire. And so that's easily the biggest loss out there, but it's not necessarily the most severe. I would argue one of the most severe is the loss of real relationship. The idea. One of the things about my dad, and I love him, he's a great man, but if I was wrong, he let me know, right? I mean, like, and sometimes it was kind, right? I mean, it was always well-intentioned. He's a good, godly man, but like, he didn't mince words, right? If I was wrong, he told me, you're wrong. And I learned what that felt like. I didn't like it. But it made me a better man, right? It made me coachable. It made me recognize I need to get better, that I'm not the best out there, right? I mean, I remember one time, I was playing Little League baseball, and, baseball was never going to be my thing. But I mean, I was just bad. And there was one time, I honestly don't remember what had happened. I think I just struck out. I would love to tell you I got hit with a pitch or something like that, but I really think I just struck out. And I started crying a little bit. No, I mean, I was probably second or third grade. And my dad, I see him walking over to the dugout, and I'm like, oh, he's going to come pat me on the back. He grabbed me by my arm and said, if I ever see you crying about striking out, you and me are going to have a problem. And I was like, oh my goodness. All of a sudden, all the tears stopped, right? Because I got a much bigger problem in front of me now, holding onto my arm, than the strikeout. But if I'd gone online and said, man, I don't connect with the pitches the way the other kids do, I would immediately get support. Man, that's not fair, And people would support me, say kind words to me, build me up, and they might even be doing it with good intentions. But when real relationship means you've got to be able to hear the hard things. You got to be able to do the hard things. That's what a marriage looks like, certainly. A marriage? Are you kidding me? Two worlds that are completely selfish. You smash them together. It's like, oh, we're one world now. It sounds beautiful, right? But the reality is large chunks of both of those worlds have to fall off painfully in order to get this new reality, that's there, right? And then, like, once that, you get over your selfishness that you had as a single person. Now we're one couple. We really are together on everything. And then you have a kid and you realize all you did was really just become selfish as a couple, right? And now, like, you've got working kids, and kids don't negotiate with anything, right? If they want to eat milk or drink milk at 2 a.m, they'll let you know, right? And there's no negotiating, right? And so all of a sudden you got to upend your life again, and it's difficult. And it's so incredibly worth it. It's so good. So good. But it's hard. And what we're seeing now is people who don't have the sticking power because they never had to go through the hard stuff, because there was always somebody to support them. There was always somebody to say, hey, this is not your fault, right? And again, my parents, I love them to death. They are good people, but they let me know it was my fault, right? Like that, son, nobody failed here except you, It's like, oh, that doesn't feel right, but it's correct, right? And what that did when I learned that was I recognized now I got to do something different the next time around if I want a different result, right? So that the loss of real relationship is the inability we've created the inability to handle difficulty in a relationship. So now, if there's difficulty in the relationship, this can't be right, and I'm gone, right? I'm gone. We used to, we went through a phase as a family of watching Hallmark movies. Don't judge me, but like, it was great, we watched When Calls the Heart and whatever. And it was good because it was innocent. There wasn't, we didn't have to worry about a bunch of trash getting in there. But at the end of the day, those are totally fake, right? Big city guy, small town girl, or vice versa, Like, that's a hard relationship to make work, right? But they don't ever get into that, right? It's just like, hey, love is just going to happen, and it's beautiful. There's never any problems, right? Everybody, goes to the pumpkin patch at the end, and family business is saved. Like, that's not real life. But that's what we've created, is this in our society, in our kids, is this idea that it all works out. And if it doesn't work out, it's definitely not your fault. It's the other person's fault. And so we don't have the ability to be in real relationship. Men universally, Mike and I were talking about this, or I was talking about it to Mike over the break just now. Men desperately want to be respected. It's something we know from research all around. The men in your life, the boys in your life, want to be respected, right? When my son did the push-up challenge, I'm just bringing it up again to remind you how amazing he is. But when he did that, like, I thought it was cool. I'll be honest. I was like, I don't think you can do it. And part of me was hoping that he would. But he didn't really care. But when he told my wife, and my wife said, Caleb, you're sick, bud. Like, you can't be doing, like, he beamed, right? Because she was just doting on him, and yes, that's amazing, but I need to take care. And that was the highlight of his day, because men want to be respected, right? Now, what that means is they've got to earn respect, right? And there's some level of they get respect just because we're being respectful, but you got to earn respect. But in a real relationship, you gotta earn respect. Online, like, let's just look at pornography. It's not just respect. Pornography gives you a slave. They'll do whatever you put in the search terms. That's what you can find. Right? It's not a real relationship, but it feeds a counterfeit respect in there. Right, and so guys are just incredibly vulnerable to it, because it's speaking to what they want. Women are made to feel they've got to compete with pornography, right? Which is a horrible, horrible reality that we're living in from that perspective. But the real relationship is lost. The difficulty of it, the not just the waiting from a sexual or a marital perspective, but just waiting through life together, right? Just as a, a dating couple of like going through and, the difficulties and learning how to interact with each other and the awkwardness and all that. If it doesn't click immediately, people are gone, because literally when you're dealing with pornography, it's a click away and you have, your counterfeit success. And it's just a horrible reality to look at. We got a loss of understanding, meaning when you go online, and think about this, and I'm not going to get into any kind of politics here, it'd be inappropriate to, but think about your candidate, whoever it is that you support, if you can support anybody. Do you feel like they're being adequately portrayed in the media? Do you feel like they're getting the honest, fair shake by everybody? And it really doesn't matter, Republican or Democrat. You could easily say no, they're not, because the reality is the internet lies. Propaganda that we all heard about, when we were in high school, when I was in high school, you learned about propaganda and you were talking about the Nazis, right? The stuff that they put out to justify their hideous regime, right? And that was what propaganda is. They got nothing on the internet right now. The Nazis, their propaganda efforts pale in comparison to what's out there for Republicans and Democrats, and against Republicans and against Democrats and against independents and against everybody. It's so hard to find real information because it takes time, and this feeds into what earlier of not being able to go through difficult stuff. The only way, and I honestly, from an information gathering standpoint, from me trying to understand what's really going on in the world, I feel like I can only do it because I was trained by CIA to do it. Because what we did was mosaic intelligence, that you go to a bunch of different sources and you get little pieces of the story and you put it all together and you can understand the bigger thing. But if I go to any end product where they're telling me the whole story, I can't trust it. And so, when I find out about an event, I got to go to a bunch of different sources. It's time consuming. But the truth is important to me, so I go through and I do that. But yeah, so it's really hard to have any kind of understanding of what's going on in society. The world is viewed through the smartphone, and the smartphone is geared to harness you, right? It is not going to tell you what is accurate. It's going to tell you what's profitable, right? It is built to harness you, right? This is why we can simultaneously, and this is not an exaggeration at all. In fact, I'll give you specific numbers. If I bring up slavery, pre-Civil War slavery in the United States, universally, and if this is not the case, we got some big issues, you and me. But universally in this room, we could say it's abhorrent, it's evil, it's bad. Every bad thing that you could say, you would say about the slavery of African Americans prior to the Civil War. Do you realize more people are bought and sold in the United States today than at any point in human history, or in the United States history? Today. So whatever you think about, well, if I was in the Civil War, I would have done, you'd do whatever you're doing now, because it's actually worse than was back then, right? But we don't want to talk about that, right? And let me just give you a reason. I'm not trying to get political. I'm trying to help you understand that this is how propaganda works. The Department of Homeland Security Inspector General's office laid out in August of this year that in the last 4 years, 323,000 children have gone missing from the southern border, and that the majority of them are in the sex trade, have been moved into the sex trade in the interior of the United States. 323,000, and that's the government, right? Talking about their work. They typically don't overshoot how bad they are. They tend to sugarcoat it a little bit. And they're telling us, the Department of Homeland Security, you look it up, August 2024 report, 323,000 children went missing from the southern border. And the majority of them went into the sex trade, slavery, just so we're clear, in the interior of the United States. Right? But we don't know about that. You've got to search through it. I I've got the links. I can show it to you if you're questioning. But we don't know about that because that's a political issue, and we call it it's an immigration issue, right? That's what we call propaganda. When people are being bought and sold, that's propaganda. Or when people are being bought and sold, that's slavery. We all know that, right? But people are being bought and sold now, but it's not politically advantageous for anybody to say it's slavery, and so we're going to call it immigration. Immigration is a political issue, and the church doesn't really need to get involved in political issues, right? Well, I would argue, and I think most people in here would, if the church was here in 1863, we should be screaming at the top of our lungs that slavery is evil. Regardless of who we're going to offend because it's a political issue, slavery is wrong, right? But here we are, because we don't have access to the information. We don't know how to get access to the information, because we actually do have access to it, but we're not being taught how to get it. We're just moving along without understanding of the world that we're in, right? More people bought and sold worldwide. That's true as well, but it's a little more comfortable because we can say, well, that's mostly Southwest Asia, that's mostly Middle East or whatever. Yeah. We look at World War II, right? World War II, 6 million Jews killed in the Holocaust in concentration camps. And I mean, it's again, something that we look at with just universal disgust and horror. And if I was there, I would do what I could to stop it, except that I can pull up on Google Earth Chinese concentration camps. I can pull up North Korean ones too. But I mean, like, I can literally pull it up on Google Earth and say, that's it, right there. Like, yeah, no, nobody knows that. Nobody's paying attention to that because it's not advantageous. China is how we get cheap labor, right? I mean, we all have got iPhones, and the reality is we know for a fact that, and this isn't the case as much anymore, and I want to be clear, I don't know this about current generation iPhones, but previous generations of iPhones were put together by child labor, right? Like we're so politically astute, and we're, as a country, we're woke, whatever that means. But like we're getting our woke updates on a cell phone put together by forced labor, slavery, right? So like we've sacrificed our understanding of the world because we're getting all of our information from this. It's coming pre-canned. It's coming in a way that's meant to be profitable, right? And if we ever do get a grasp on reality, right? And every once in a while, something breaks through, right? Like, for instance, I would tell you, it's a big deal, regardless of how you feel about any particular political candidate. It's a big deal there's been 2 assassination attempts this election cycle, right? That's a big deal, right? People are taking shots at a presidential candidate. It's happened before, but not recently, right? And yeah, it's a big deal. And so people kind of woke up to that. But like, you haven't heard about that in a while, right? I mean, you had Secret Service 2, what they refer to as a mission failure, right? 2 mission failures, 1 election cycle on the same candidate, right? That's a big deal. But because of the smartphone society, what we're losing is our attention span. We cannot stay focused on that issue, whatever that issue is. Right? I mean, we'll hear statistics like 323,000 kids lost from the southern border, but soon as something shiny rolls past, we're chasing it. Psychologists refer to it as shiny object syndrome, right? That when we're like that bass when that little jig goes by, like, oh my goodness, that's the thing, that's my whole world now, right? And then another one goes by in a different direction. We're off in that direction. We as a nation have no attention span, right? Again, this is a cell phone driven thing, right? One of the first major changes in attention span that was deliberate was in 1984, I believe, when MTV, back when they first came on board, right? You remember when they actually played music? They cut down the average length of a shot from a camera in a video, right? So typically a transition from one camera to another would be like 45 seconds to a minute, right? When MTV came in and started shooting these music videos, what they started doing was intentionally just keeping the screen, each particular shot to sometimes 10, 15 seconds before they move between the camera. Right, so the perspective changed every 10 or 15 seconds. And so people started, especially young people watching that, started having a shorter attention span, because the longer you had one shot, the less interested they got, because they were trained, I need a new perspective every 10 seconds, right? So we saw a generational shift in attention span starting in 1984. Since the smartphone society came into being, our attention spans just dropped off the map. I mean, like you're talking sometimes seconds. Right? I mean, like just 1 or 2 seconds before we need a perspective shift. And that's how reels are built. And it's why if you're creating content for a teenager now, the length of your shots needs to be less than 5 seconds before you shift perspective. Right? And if it's not, you're going to lose them. Right? So if you've ever wondered when you're having, and I have done this, if you're having a conversation with your teenager, and after about 5 seconds, they kind of, their eyes go high and right, or high and left, there's kind of that 1,000-yard stare. They're not used to having to watch something that long, right? You couldn't deliver your message in 5 seconds, so they're moving on to the next thing, right? But here's the deal. Again, the cell phone will deliver what they need. This is how the cell phone keeps them coming back, is because the cell phone has trained them, you need a new perspective every 5 seconds. The only place you can really get that is online, right? And so that loss of attention, loss of attention span is a huge thing. So that's that. Let me see here. Another thing, the loss of wonder, right? Now, I really mean two different things about this. In one aspect, you see things like, one of my favorite examples of the loss of wonder is Yosemite State Park, or National Park, out in California. Beautiful area, just gorgeous. I mean, world renowned for the views and, and all that. And if you go on their website, they've got some reviews of Yosemite, and one of them is like, weather was horrible and the Wi-Fi sucked. And it's like, it's Yosemite, man. Like, it's Yosemite, you're complaining about the Wi-Fi? And that's what I'm talking about, is what does it take for you to be impressed, right? I'm telling you, one of the things I love about coming to visit here is I've got a long drive, and I can watch when I get out there on 40 at Conway and I'm heading this way, the topography just changes as you're getting out here. And it's a beautiful thing to watch. And really even coming out of Searcy, right? I mean, Searcy's surrounded by beautiful places, so it just makes me question, why do we stop there? But it's a different discussion. But it's beautiful in every direction, except towards Bald Mountain. But the reality is, I have a sense of wonder. If I go to the mountain, I can look at the mountains every morning. I mean, it's just gorgeous. I've traveled a lot, and some of my favorite memories, most of my favorite memories from traveling is just what I was looking at when I woke up. Just beautiful vistas. I love hunting. My dad and my brother right now are elk hunting in Northwest Colorado, trying to not have my feelings hurt that I'm not there with them. But they're out there, and that's just gorgeous. Snow on the ground, just sitting there. I just love it. I mean, I'm at a stage and an age where I can go hunt all day long, and if I don't see a deer, that's fine. Like I just like being out there, just like the quiet. And we're losing that as a society. It's not that you have, what is it out there at Yosemite, Half Dome? Is that right? Am I saying that right? Yosemite Capitan. Yeah. Those views are gorgeous, unlike anything else in the world. But it's not enough. Right? It's not flashy. It doesn't have a soundtrack, And so we're losing the ability to have wonder, but we're also, in another sense, we're losing the ability to wonder about anything, right? Like when I was a kid, you grew up and like, well, a story about my dad. My dad's an auto mechanic, and when he and my mom got married, she came home one day, and they'd been given a grandfather clock for a wedding gift, right? You know, big old school grandfather clock. And she came home, and he had taken the whole thing apart. It was all just pieces in the living room. And she was like, you know, Morton, what are you doing? This is like, why did you tear this apart? And he goes, I had to understand how it worked. You know? And I mean, the way his mind works, you know, that evening before dinner, it was all back together and working. You know, I mean, that's how his mind works. But he wondered. Now, you don't got to contemplate anything. If you have the slightest question, go on your smartphone and ask. Right? You don't have to spend time thinking. And that time spent thinking is, just so we're clear, how we got Western civilization. Right? It's not a small thing. Every major development has come when somebody didn't have anything to think about except, why won't this work? Right? Or I want to do something like this. And they just sat there and thought about it. Right? Whereas now, you can get video animation of anything. You can Google a question and you can have the answer like that. And so we've lost the ability to really contemplate things, you know? One of the things that I love about hunting, and, you know, when I talked about the dads and sons doing this kind of connection camp off grid, is we spend some time around a fire. Right? And there's something about just a good fire where you're looking at it. I mean, I find that even young boys can sit there and watch a fire for a long time, right? And there's something reconnecting, because for a long time, the majority of the time people have been on the planet, that was the most interesting thing you could do, you know, is from an entertainment perspective. At night, the fire and the flames jumping around, like that's what you got, you know. The military, they call it Ranger TV, you know, just looking at a campfire. We've lost that ability. Right now, we have kids who demand to be entertained, or they're not going to stay with it. They're not going to contemplate bigger issues. Because they can get answers like that. They're not going to read a book because they can get answers like that. You know, my son was asking me about World War II, and just about a few questions about World War II. And I said, you know, you really ought to read this. And I gave him the five volume set of Winston Churchill's History of the Second World War. And I might as well just, no pun intended, drop the nuke on him. Because it was just so overwhelming. But I was like, dude, you realize how much knowledge is in this? Even if some of it's dumb, like people making dumb decisions, you realize how much you can learn from this? And I mean, he's cracking it. You know, he's doing his best to get after it. But the reality is, our kids are losing the ability to think about things over the long term and dedicate themselves to solutions, because they're used to just getting it immediately. And so we're in a pretty rough spot, because when you start looking at our competitors, and you know, and you know, talking about threats online, TikTok is a huge thing in the United States for teenagers, right? And it's got everything from music videos to porn, which I don't know that that's a big spectrum. They're often almost synonymous, but TikTok's a big deal, right? People doing TikTok dances and, you know, little TikTok trends. And it's at best mindless stuff, right? China, who owns TikTok, the company that owns it is called ByteDance. They're owned, as is every company in a communist country, owned by the government, although there's a little bit of plausible deniability there. But they're run by the Chinese government, and ByteDance keeps our TikTok full of porn. The Chinese version of TikTok, it's the same same software, but it is filled with STEM, right? Science, technology, engineering, and math, right? Because that's what they want their kids addicted to. And it's working. It's absolutely working. Because their kids are growing in knowledge by leaps and bounds. The same technology that's used in America to get kids to lust after whatever they're looking at is used to make Chinese kids want more knowledge on that particular engineering issue, or how did they put that all together, or whatever, right? And it's working, and it has this exact same effectiveness, but to a different end. So when we start talking about, is technology trying to harm you? Well, if I was an adversary, that's definitely what I would do. And China is an adversary from a geopolitical perspective, and that's what they're filling our kids' screens with. So so it's not a good thing. So again, we've got the lack of wonder, loss of relationship, and we got the loss of innocence. And this one doesn't really need a whole lot of explanation, but kids are being exposed to horrible things a lot earlier. I have a friend whose kindergarten son was exposed to pornography in the kindergarten classroom because some kid got onto an iPad or something along those lines and looked it up, which, from my perspective, I've got questions for the dad in that family if the kid in kindergarten knew how to look that up, but that's neither here nor there. But the reality is, things that, I'm just being very candid with you, things that I learned as a grown man, kids are learning, elementary age kids are learning about, and they still don't have the mind to comprehend it. And we're asking them to make big decisions about things that they don't fully understand. And so that loss of innocence is, and not just from a sexual perspective, but from a violence perspective. The desensitization, the understanding of not just what a man is and what a woman is, but what their roles are. The idea of sexual predation is out there. The idea that kids at a very young age are learning that there's people out there who are trying to take advantage of them sexually. That in and of itself is a hard thing for a kid to grasp. But they're learning about that and so much more. So it's taken a lot from us. So I want to ask us a few questions as far as trying to figure out how do we engage these threats. And so what I would ask you to think about is, if you've got a teenager in your life, why would they be reluctant to talk to you? I think it's worth asking. Why would they be reluctant to talk to you? What was your reaction the last time they brought something up to you? Right? I mean, was it something that went really well? Was it something where you raised your voice? Was it something, and don't get me wrong, I'm all for confronting evil and calling evil what it is. I'm not saying sugarcoat stuff, but I'm saying you've got to think through, if you have a child who is not used to confrontation, why would they come to you? Well, you've got to have a relationship. You've got to have a relationship with them, because there's just no other way around it. So why would a kid be reluctant to come to you if they're struggling with it? And I asked this question in February, but it's worth asking again. If a child had been caught by human traffickers and kept for a year, and you got them back, what would you be worried had happened to them? Because if they went to a human trafficker, bad stuff happened. right? You know evil is there, and you know they were at the mercy of that evil for a year. What would you worry about? And then understand the internet teaches them the same thing, right? The internet teaches them the same thing, but we're not worried about it for whatever reason. They can everything that a human trafficker can do gets advertised on social media, on smartphones all the time. Speaking of, to tie this in with the loss of innocence, ask a kid what OnlyFans is, right? Ask them. They know. And you may not. That's fine. Or you might want to don't look it up, but you might want to research that a little bit. But kids know. And so what a human trafficker does is advertise online all day long. So what would you be worried about? What would you be worried a human trafficker taught your kid? Then you need to be worried about that. You need to be worried about that, and you need to engage your child in a way that brings them in. If they had been caught by a human trafficker, they would not be. You would not be harsh to them. You would not be blaming them, right? You wouldn't be telling them it's your fault because you did this and you're a bad kid because of this. This is not what we do. This is not. No. You would understand they were at the mercy of someone who knew more and could do more to them, that they really didn't have a chance of standing up against it. And so you would come alongside them to rehabilitate them, not to blame them, not to shame them, but to rehabilitate them, to bring them into the walk, into a closer walk with Christ, to bring that healing into their life, to teach and train them in the way that they should go, so that when they're old, they won't turn from it. That's what you would do if your kid had been caught by a human trafficker for a year. That's what you should be doing right now. This isn't something where you go into your 16-year-old boy or your 12-year-old boy or your 12-year-old daughter and you snatch them bald-headed because they were doing something online they shouldn't have been doing. This is where you go in and you recognize they're soldiers in a war that they didn't ask to be a part of, and we didn't equip them for it. This is not a blame game. This is a come alongside, train them up in the way they should go, meaning you've got to do it too. You got to get down in the trenches with them and train them to walk with Christ, because he's the only hope we have in this world. There's nothing else. So we've got to recognize what's happening to our kids. And then if you do have a kid, or if you have a situation where a kid opens up to you and says, hey, I did this or I did that, I want to tell you something from an interrogator's perspective. That's the bulk of my time at CIAO as an interrogator. I'm going to tell you this. Nobody tells you everything at first. Nobody tells you everything at first. And so when they come in and they say, I did this, all they're doing is testing the waters, right? And if you lose your ever-loving mind because they did that, well, you know what you're not going to hear about? All this other stuff, right? This is human nature. In interrogations, we call it throwing the bone, right? That, if you're breaking into a place and they got dogs, the dog's coming after you, and you toss a piece of meat or toss a bone, and the dog goes after that, then they leave you alone, right? That's what people do when they're being questioned or in the awkwardness and they bring up something. That first thing is the meat. Like how are you going to treat that, right? You've got to ignore that, not ignore it, but you've got to acknowledge it. And hey, this is a normal Saturday. Right? From an emotional perspective, I'm not going to lose my mind over it. And this is whether they've done something bad or something's been done to them. I had a situation I was brought into where a young girl had been taken advantage of by a grown man, and she felt so much shame for it. She had done nothing wrong. I mean, there had been sexual contact, but again, the law recognizes it as rape, I don't know why we wouldn't, right? This is why we have laws against harming minors, is because they're not making decisions. They're not capable of those types of decisions. And so, like, she felt so much shame, and people were adding to that shame, that she should have known better. She was old enough that she should have done this or that. Man, that's what you say if you want your kid to shut up and never tell you anything again. You add that blame in there. That's what's going to shut down that conversation. But to sit there with them, cry with them, and say, hey, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I couldn't have been there for you. I'm so sorry you were in this situation. And then walk through it with them. That's how we get out of this, right? When a kid opens up to you, you've got to just accept it. And you're not correcting in that moment. You're not chastising at all. You're teaching, you're training. And that's how we move forward. So we gotta make sure we're putting ourselves in check, right? At the end of the day, Christianity is about rescue. That's a key piece that we often forget. It is about rescue. It's what Christ did for you. You were in a hopeless, beyond hopeless situation. And everything that you brought to your salvation, the only thing you brought to your salvation was a desperate need for it. Right? You're not better, you're not anything other than a person in desperate need of a Savior. Praise God you have one. Right? Jesus Christ came and has lifted you out of the pit. Right? And he calls us to do the same for the other people around us. Christianity, at the end of the day, is about rescue. There's two things that you cannot do in heaven. Right? Two things that you cannot do in heaven. You can't sin and you can't evangelize. Which do you think you were left here to do? Right? We're here to rescue people from sin. And our first priority as parents is our homes, is our children. And yes, we have responsibilities to the community at large, and we have a responsibility to lead wherever we are, to point people to Christ wherever we are. But it starts in the home. It starts in the home with what you're bringing into the home, what you're allowing, the areas that you're allowing your kids to go into, and if you're trying to be their friend all the time, it ain't gonna work out well for anybody. Because you're not a good, if you're like me, you're not a good teenager, right? And so the friend thing isn't going to work out, and you can't try and be a teenager and be a good parent. So you're kind of failing everywhere. You're a parent, you're a shepherd, you're a guide, you're a grandparent, and you've got to use that knowledge, skills, and ability to bring that child into closer relationship with Christ, and you do that by example and by relationship. And I wish I could say there's a switch you could flip or one thing you could do that's going to make it easy, but the reality is once you shore up one area, Satan's coming in another, right? This is the nature of a fallen world. But it's a lot easier to win a war when you respect the fact that you're in one. And that's what we're called to do. We're in a war, and we got to start acting like it. So I think we're going to take a break for dinner. We are going to take a break for dinner. We'll come back in here at 6:30, and we'll dive into the AI stuff, which is a whole brand new world of crazy. So I'll see you, I guess, in about 40 minutes after dinner. Before we go, yeah. Oh. All righty. Hey, absolutely. Absolutely.
Father, we thank you for today and all that it brings, the blessings that it brings. We thank you for Sam being here with us. We see in front of us and around us in all kinds of ways the work that needs to be done. And our prayer, Father, is that we do it in the way that you directed and the way that you've shown us through your Son. thankful for the food that's been provided, and all the ways that you continue to bless us. We ask that you continue to be with each one of us. We love you so much. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.